Okay, welcome at FOSDEM 2016 here in Janson. In the main track, welcome Alexander Bokoboy. He will tell us something about Freeipa in Gnome, enterprise desktop at home, with that setup. And I think as we've got now time 12, we should begin. Welcome.
Thank you everyone who made this rainy trip to the big room. I usually don't talk about this. I usually work on the server side. And on the server side, the typical situation is that nobody knows about you unless your printer is broken or nothing routes your packets. But even then, people don't know that it's you because that's packets control the computer. And for like 5-7 years, we were working on the server side with Freeipa, trying to build up infrastructure for authentication, for identity, and all this enterprise speak. And last year, we looked into the situation. When you have all this infrastructure, you need to do something with it. It needs to be usable at the other end, the desktop. So I started looking into desktop and talking to various desktop guys of Red Hat in the communities. And we choose to work with Gnome with different projects to see what we can do to take the benefits from what we developed on the server side of Freeipa. So it went to the point that when we talk about desktop and enterprise, people typically think about Microsoft Word replacements rather than authentication, rather than some identities, rather than access controls and so on. They kind of assume it, but really think about Office. And if I work from home, my local office network is not managed by my company yet. I still kind of work for company, but my office is my room, so I'm outside of the network that is managed by the company. At the same time, the company services are always cloud, and there are actually many clouds that these services utilize. Some clouds are internal, some clouds are external from external providers, and effectively you get into a situation that you have multiple identities disorder. And this kind of disorder is a typical one. You have a corporate account that will be issued once you enrolled. You got your local services, local servers, and so on, a bunch of local accounts that you have to manage for your family, for yourself, for your kids and friends, and so on. Then you have a lot of cloud-based stuff that you have to deal with, be it your mail providers, be it your Facebook friends, if there are some, or Google Plus if there are some, or some other services. And then if you're participating in free software projects, chances are you actually dominate in multiple projects, not just one. So you have multiple hats to bear. And in reality, there is also a government that you are talking to, and many governments increasingly start doing cryptography on your ID cards, and they might not take this for every single transaction with the government, but they do want to issue certificates to you and accept only those. And those certificates typically issued by the certification authorities that are not trusted by your browser, by your system, and so on. So the thing is, I want to use all this on the desktop, and not just a single one, or just what my browser vendor thinks is the right thing, if we are talking about the browsers. And also, last but not least, is the private data that I have. My data that I store on my servers or somewhere else, encrypted, fetched, resolved by somebody. It also has to be usable for me regardless of which kind of identity I am at the current situation. So I work on Freeipa. It's a project that tries to manage identities and policies in general speak. They are stored centrally in the Freeipa web server. They are applied locally by the software running on your desktop. And typical environment in Fedora or Red Hat Enterprise, Linux or CentOS or Debian or Ubuntu, it's SSD daemon, and it's used fairly well across the commercial customers of Red Hat and others, but it's also used by other free software projects. And one of the bigger publicized ones is the Gnome Foundation. So Gnome project is using actually Freeipa to manage a whole Gnome account environment. So if you're a Gnome contributor, chances are that you're already using Freeipa. So how we can define the enterprises-ness of the desktop? So let's score by a password. A typical enterprise environment always talks about single sign-on. So on this front, if we talk about a reboot, which happens sometimes, right? So the typical workflow on the reboot of a laptop is that I have to log in into the system with most likely a local account. Then I jump onto the private virtual network and enter another password. I obtain, or with entering that password, I might be required to enter some additional factors for authentication, like additional token values. Then I obtain a typical corporate Kerberos credentials. And then I use the and then I use the actual corporate application, which might come from a third-party integrator or vendor which does not support your Kerberos environment. So you get like 4 passwords that you need to enter. They might be exactly the same, they might be different, but 4 credentials that you have to enter until you get to the point that you actually use your application. Can we do better than that? Can we just sign in into corporate environment if our laptop is allowed to that? And the corporate here is really just a word. This corporate environment might be just your local deployment of Freeipa, which is your whole corporate environment. And use the applications that we use there. So let's try to log in first. I'll be brutal. This is my log screen. This is live demo. So I log back into my system. And if I look into the Kerberos ticket cache, it's badly formatted here because I made it a bit bigger so that people can see it on the screen. But I just got, if you look at the time, it's the same time here. I just got a ticket from the server. The server runs over internet. I'm not running any VPN to that server right now. So I got Kerberos ticket from internet, over public internet, the one that's provided here. And now I will use it to establish a VPN connection. And now you can see I got a second ticket. A second ticket. So what happened is that regardless where I am, if I have a internet access, I can be in my environment in entering credentials once and then during the VPN with those credentials. I did not need to enter 4 times or even 2 times. This is already an improvement, right? So the part of what allowed me to do it means that the system is configured as applying to my personal Freeipa deployment, which is somewhere in the data center, but it could be at my home if I would be more careful about my home and ran my own electricity provider. Then as SSD, daemon on this machine handles logging and Kerberos keys. SSD actually notices that we are using a proxy for Kerberos, and we are using it over public internet. And Kerberos was actually created to be used over public networks, not secure for other means. And then I established a VPN connection based on this Kerberos key. So we will go into details of it, but the credentials were entered just once. So this Kerberos proxy is a thing that was developed as a part of a problem that Microsoft needed to solve in 2007 with the Active Directory. So they created something that has this awkward name for the protocol, MSKKDCP, which is basically a remote Kerberos access without being on the terminal. It's transparent for Kerberos library users since Kerberos 1.13 for those who use Amity Kerberos. And the only thing you need to have is basically a string that says that your KDC is at HTTPS something. You write this thing. Then it tunnels the data over HTTPS, and it can do it in such a way that the proxy can distribute traffic to multiple Kerberos realms behind this gateway, this proxy. So you can, for example, have a gateway based on Freeipa, and then you can have a whole set of Active Directory environments that are there. And people will be using Active Directory credentials instead of IP credentials. That's already in Red Hat Enterprise 7.2. And the Gnome project has this enabled for SSH users instead of SSH publishers. They can use Kerberos to log in and have a single sign-on for 24 hours. SSD will then automatically extend the ticket for more time. On the VPN side, there is only one VPN currently that VPN software that supports the proxy. It's the, actually not proxy, but the JSON API integration. That's Open Connect. So to go into do and work out of the box, OpenVPN doesn't work with JSON API credentials, and people asking for better part of this decade for providing that. Unfortunately, developers of OpenVPN thought that using certificates is a better solution, probably not really understanding the actual use cases. But I hope there's something about to happen and do the change. And the other problem is that if you obtain a certain ticket, the ticket only says that your identity is verified, but it doesn't say how hard was the information that you used to verify yourself. If you provide a passport physically, if you provide multiple factors for authentication, or you just provide a passport, did somebody spool it? So we on Kerberos 1.14, we have basic implementation of so-called authentication indicators, where a plugin that the plugin within the Kerberos server can say that this ticket was obtained using a token in addition to the password. So it presents like a stronger guarantee that it's safe. And in Freeipa, before we support natively multi-factor authentication, so it works with keys, it works with Freeipa on Android and iOS, and Google Authenticator applications, and all HTTP, OTP, and TOTP compatible things. It's enforced in Kerberos, so you log into Kerberos, and if you have in your account, you have the token associated with the Kerberos credentials. You will not be able to log in just with the password. You have to provide a token. So it kind of provides you a bit of assurance on how this system was authenticated. And you can use Freeipa, it's available. This is a screenshot from the Google Play Store. But I will do a demo of interactive mode using the YubiKey. So what I will do right now is that I will program this YubiKey associated with my identity, and you will see what happens next. Let me just the reason I'm doing this in the command line in the console now, because I cannot program USB devices from the browser. So IDA has a command line to RP, and it has a command OTP token -add. And to program YubiKey, we have a special command like this. So let me take a first floor in this token. So I programmed the token here against my server somewhere in the cloud. I used my actual Kerberos credentials, the ticket that I got paid when I logged into the machine, to authenticate against the Freeipa server, and the token was actually associated with my identity. You can see the owner screen here that says that it's me. Exactly because I was authenticated by under my Kerberos principle. So now, if I do again move the screen, one subtle thing happened here. The prompt that you see there says not a password, it says a first factor, which is a password, but it hints the user that there might be more. After I enter the first password, first factor, it asks me for the next one. And I actually can configure, as admin, I can configure that this user can only use multi-factor authentication, not skip this step. So let me enter. And I got back. And actually, at the point when I got back, I got a new ticket driver certificate. So SSSD authenticated with my token and generated me a new ticket driver certificate. On this basis, I will be obtaining all the other tickets. So far so good. So what I have now is I got one-time password token to the physical hardware YubiKey. And I added it associated with myself in my Freeipa environment. Then SSD again handled moving, and it notices that the Kerberos server said I need more data, and pass it through this information through the time step to the actual application. In this case, it's GDM. But it would work exactly the same for any other single application that uses the same time step. The login again verified with the public network using the same proxy protocol. Well, in this case, we don't have this dynamic switching. I'm I'm actually on VPN, right? So I could have switched to the internal view of the KBC, right? But I'm not. I'm also using this public network. You can improve that. And then I get the ticket. The first factor is then provided further to the video for unlocking the Gnome passwords. Because if I provide the full password plus the token value, on the first log onto the machine, when the Gnome password and key storage is created, then I effectively wouldn't be able to unlock it in the next one because the token will change next time. So it took some time to separate these problems and get a bit of smart logic to handle this. Again, credentials were entered just once, one screen, and then we can use or derive some facts about this authentication based on this fact. So what we can derive? The obvious part of it is actually we can authenticate against almost anything. And one simple thing is I'm already authenticated against my identity and authentication server, my Freeipa server, to get the access to the system. If I wouldn't have any access, SSSD would actually cache an encrypted hash of my password locally without the token, and would still allow me to log on when I would be, for example, playing without access to the internet. But it wouldn't ask me for the second part. I can obtain some SAML assertion for other web services. That's already enterprise to me, but I will show you how this works. I can access network file systems like Sieves, SMB, and NFS4 using that ticket already if I have this configured to the environment. Again, for those, I don't need to enter my credentials. As if it's a miracle, but it's a normal thing that should happen. And I obviously can display properties of the tickets that I obtained. It's not working yet well, and I will show how it's not working. But I also can renew the ticket. Typically, the ticket is issued for some time. For example, in Red Hat, it's issued for 10 hours, and then you have to obtain a new one to renew the old one. Freeipa issues it for 24 hours, and you can configure it for the renewal. And SSD can handle the renewal. And with the recent purpose, you actually can have multiple principals in use, multiple credentials storages in use at the same time. You can be an admin, you can be me, you can be somebody else from a different realm at the same time, at the same session. It's a bit awkward how to use it right now, but that's exactly because we don't have this user experience cleared and improved. So let's authenticate in the SSH. Epifine is a Gnome web browser. I will do it with just an Epifine here, and I will talk about the other parts. But practically, if you take Fedora 23 or any other release since 2009, the JSS support, JSS API support is not there because it was removed in Lipsol after refactoring. And there is a bug open since 2009 that asks for adding this support, and it's still not there. WebKey GTK is not usable because it's used. So Epifine is not usable with the Kerberos. So for example, you cannot log in into Google applications with this one. And that's pretty sort of state. So this was the state when I presented this to Gnome developers in August at GUA, the annual conference. And we started from there, and we got to the point that we have some patches that implement GSS API in Lipsol and allow us to proceed up to the application level in Epifine as a web browser. So Tomasz Kopela from Red Hat and David Hookhouse from Unity worked and mostly fixed it. It has some bugs, but they can be weeded out. So for the basic purpose scenario, things are working pretty well. This laptop currently is built, and let me get into amplifying. So this is Gnome browser, and I will try to log into Freeipa Live. I did not need to enter any password, and if we look here, we actually have a non-continuity for the HTTP principle on the Freeipa server. That ticket was asked for and obtained by the browser. In this case, the advanced browser. So this is mine. I'm not an admin, so I see only the part that I am supposed to see as a user. But you can see that I have some certificate associated with myself. Creating a public part of this certificate. And you can see that I'm a member of certain groups and things. And if I log out of here and log in as admin, this will be just normal login without any problems. And I will see my see the cool IPA stuff. You actually can play with this if you go to demo.freeipa.org. You will get the spray field environment that updates itself every 24 hours. And you can join your own system to that environment. And you can play and create some stuff there. But what happened is that, again, no credentials were entered twice to get into the application. In this case, it's administrative application, but nevertheless, it's the. But we hope to get this into the next Gnome, stable Gnome release at some point. We want to publish it and grow. It already represents a huge jump in productivity. So of course, the single sign-on is the primary feature. It reduces the amount of interactions that you have to do. Then you can do the automated credentials renewal. Because if you have credentials and you can renew them, then you can roll on and do this for some external services. Can we get a mic?
It's okay.
Thanks, Alexander. Sorry, I hope it's okay to interrupt. Can you go back one to the? Can you go back a slide? So you've got it into WebKit GTK. What is the likelihood, or is it already inside Firefox and Chrome? Is that important?
So this is different engine. This is the engine.
Sure, I know, but
yeah, I will come to what happens in Firefox and Chrome.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you will get.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. So what you can do is you get automated tokens for cases when you allow it at once, and then if the token expires, the system should actually notice that it expired before it expires and re-obtain the token so that we get a flow that is not interrupted in your user function. Now, if you're using multiple factors, you of course cannot do this renewal automatically without involving the user. And this is where integration with the desktop tools is important, because you have at least at some point have to pop up the window to the user to say, okay, I need more information. And also, this gives us ability to effective way, don't store locally any passwords or credentials, so you can create secure environments and actually prove that they are more secure than typical kiosks type of environments. Then you can visualize what happens. What happens if you have all these things? So let's go into the non-online accounts. You can see that I actually have 3 Kerberos tickets. I have one that is valid, working, and 2 that has no credentials. They expired. If Gnome notices them, but I cannot see them on the command line because they are not there. Other than that, this window is pretty useless. It doesn't even say which credentials we are dealing with, how the Kerberos principle is called. I know that this one, the first one, is my principle because I logged in with it. But what I have is this. It's about the same like this one, the same real, but I don't have any principal names here. Okay. So this is something that would probably be very easy to fix. And it also says that whoever developed this had no experience because there was no way to test it, no way to play with it. Now we have some way, so we can improve, and that's good. Now let's do some interesting stuff. I'll do logging into Red Hat, which is not using the Kerberos software, but it's using Kerberos inside. So I'll do logging. I guess it's I press the wrong button, but just click the real. Yeah. Oh, just a second. Yeah, so now I'm on 2 different VPN networks at the same time. And I can talk to a different Kerberos. So let me become myself in a different real. It will take a bit of time because the network here is just a bit slower. But once I do this, I will be able to use a ticket from that server to authenticate against. Looks like they are not so good. I'll get there. So we can choose. We could choose if there would be a software for choosing different Kerberos principles. There is a support for multiple principles at the same time. And actually, if I open the command line, I can see that I have a ticket cache here, and somehow I cannot reach mine PVC server, but that will prevent me showing one part of the daemon. But anyway, if we have multiple identities, we could select which one is primary. So for example, if I'm myself and admin, I have two different things, myself and admin. I can say to the browser which one to use when authenticating to Freeipa web blog or any other blog. A single principle can be primary, the others are not. And Kerberos library has all logical how to select which one is not. And on command line you can switch them, but in the UI you cannot. And then you can review it, and for the multi-factor principles, renewal requires interaction with the user, so interaction with this code, which is missing currently, and think of how to implement it. In the other browsers, things generally work, but they are hard. So for example, in Firefox, you have to do manually set options in about config, saying that yes, please negotiate with the tickets against the domains that are there. This actually prevents using Kerberos as a public service against some other well-known providers. If they would start providing it, everybody would need to change the browser configuration, which is wrong. So what we try to do is we have some RFC for defining the data in the DNS section, in the DNS zone that says where we can find information about Kerberos. Typically you can find some, but you cannot find, for example, information about DNS host, because that's a URL, not just a host name, and the other parts are missing. And if you want to trust information about DNS, you also need to have DNS sec support on both client and server, so that you actually believe that you got authoritative answer for that. We used to provide a plugin that automates the configuration of Firefox. But Firefox actually brought external extensions since version 43. They decided that the extensions provided by somebody else cannot be installed anymore, regardless how they sign it, only if they come from the central location, from so-called AMI place from which Mozilla creates. That extension can be trusted and installed. They are fighting against spam and a lot of viral extensions that are trying to take away the data, but it also complicates the work for like zero configuration on these things. The extension itself was generated locally by the create a server you install. So it contains information about your realm, about your certificate authority, so that it can be trusted and propagated automatically. And of course, you can do the configuration yourself. In Chromium, Chrome on Windows actually respects the Internet Explorer settings for this. So if you have Windows machine enrolled into the Active Directory and you enable single sign-on in Internet Explorer settings, Chrome will respect them. Unfortunately, Chrome has a problem with the processing of GSS API, which is 3W authenticate, negotiate type. If credentials are not available, it pops up your window to enter the username and password to do NTLM SSP authentication, even if your server don't support that at all. And that confuses a lot. But on Linux, it's even more confusing. There's no settings in the UI where you can specify, unlike in Firefox, you can specify that even for manually. On Linux and macOS, you have to do it with the command line every time you start Chrome. You have to say that my real is this, my allowing domains to operate like this and that, and it's really not user-friendly, let's just say. So with the fixes in libsoap and WebKit GTK, what we got is we always use GSS API. The server advertises negotiate authentication over HTTPS. The reason we can safely do this is before the Kerberos protocol is built in such a way that you never authenticate to the third party. You authenticate to your Kerberos distribution center. So you ask the Kerberos distribution center, give me a ticket to that third party. And that means that the Kerberos distribution center has to know that third party. If you ask a PDC and PDC say, I cannot give you a ticket, it means that most likely it doesn't know about the parser. So the third-party server, the web server, doesn't even get the response back with your Kerberos credentials. Nothing leaked there. There is one problem because your JDC actually knows that you tried to access that website. However malicious or illegal that was, which required to ask for the Kerberos. So it's a sort of a leak of your actions. Kerberos has protection against this called anonymous principles. So you can claim that you're anonymous, request certain operations, verify that they happen, that ticket can be obtained to the third party, and then switch back to the normal identity and use it to receive a ticket again. So after user confirmed that yes, he wants this to be done, like we do already for saving passports. Like we ask user, do you want to save this passport for the next time? And the problem with Kerberos and browsers, and this is the big problem, is that the JSS API is synchronous. So until you get the whole sequence finished, your browser will stay. And this browser has a single UI for all browser tabs. The all tabs will be handy. So it's not a good user experience. And regardless of Kerberos, this user experience is always bad, and it was bad in like 6 or 7 years ago when we worked in Nokia on MIMO browsers, trying to create something that you can use on the mobile, and internet was much slower at that time. So even the response from the server when you try to authenticate or you try to resolve DNS record, which also was at that point done synchronously, could lock up your browser. So you will see it's really badly user experience. This is still a major issue. There's still some problems that need to be solved in all browsers. So what practical use of all of this? This is nice for the enterprise environment. What practical value we can extract from it other than logging into the administrative interface of creating and so forth? Well, let me do a practical thing. So I have a setup of own cloud to which I hacked in a subport of JSS API. I did not add JSS API support myself into own cloud. Instead, I use something called Epsilon, which provides an aggregation of different authentication methods, including some. And what happened is I tried to log into own cloud, my own cloud install. It saw that I tapped into the location on the own cloud server that is protected by credentials. They have to be in Kerberos credentials. And that redirects me to the Epsilon takes my Kerberos credentials and generates the some assertion that my own cloud takes, parses it, and sets up the configuration. This is all cloud 8.2. Community edition, it doesn't have this support. All cloud sells this feature in the enterprise version of them. So effectively, I revamped the enterprise version of all cloud in 10 lines of code. Well, not the whole enterprise edition, of course, but commodizing these kind of features is probably a good thing. Yeah. So if I don't have need to enter credentials, then I simply can use this section without without creating problems to myself, or as I grow in and become older, my brain will fall on using those technologies. So using it once per session is probably better, unless I would be a paranoid and set up myself to use it every single time. But effectively, this is stretching your own itch for becoming older and more comfortable with the controllers. And this is the real on cloud. So in fact, it has the editor that contains all content of my presentation, so I can work on it and I can share it somewhere. So this is not a mobile, this is working thing. Okay, credentials to enter at once. So it's kind of a rhyme in this presentation, but I guess it's a good one. Yeah. So, unfortunately, I cannot use the same yet in the Gnome Online account. So, if I want to go here in the settings and add an on-cloud account so that I get synchronization stuff working, you see it asks me for the password. And even if I enter all the details here, it still asks me for the password, so I cannot even proceed. But this is something that can be fixed because exactly the same framework is used for logging into Google stuff. And at least with Red Hat Kerberos setup, corporate setup, which I hope I will get at some point working. You can actually use it to log into the Google stuff. So one thing I would try to do right now is I have actually the video of that, but it's a bit weird aspect ratio that actually tries to log in using my Kerberos credentials into Google. You see, I did not enter my password at all. It used my Kerberos. And now in my desktop, I have access to all the services that Google provides to me. And if I take the browser, into the drive, the Google Drive. Again, I don't enter the password. The thing goes into the Red Hat integration with Google, and then I log in with the Kerberos credentials. And there's a message. There's a message below that says that your running outdated web browser does not provide the features that Google apps require. So to fix this problem, right now you have to have a separated point for normal password-based authentication. Now the other part is that with Freeipa 4.2 we have a full-featured support for certificates. We have certificate support for hosts and services like web servers and whatnot since the early time, like maybe 5 years ago. But now we have support for user certificates and actually for different profiles. So you can create a certificate according to your own profile. You can use that for storing separate credentials on the server, provisioning them to different machines using different credentials again, and use a vault to store and retrieve this data. And the certificates also can come from the smart cards and SSD in the recent release It's all working with your identity. Can use authentication from the smart card, whether it's your governmental ID or it's just a YubiKey Neo, which includes the smart card insurance. So, how enterprise our home could become? Of course, what you get from these enterprise stuff is you control your own infrastructure. That's for paranoids 5 years ago, for saving people today. You improve user experience for your family, for yourself, for your colleagues, if you're running your own business or your non-governmental organization and government interactions. And you profit with it. And your profit might not come as a certain bag of money, but certainly improving your lost time that you spend on authenticating and authenticating, you can spend finally something more tangible. So, thank you for your attendance, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Whether now, if you have some time, surprisingly we do. And I'll be here for the group.
Yeah, maybe you can question him directly here, because we have to continue at 1300 with other talk. So we would like to say thank you for the talk.